Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Through the Dragon Glass. We are done with The Secrets of the Federal Reserve by Eustace Mullins. Yes, and now we're moving on to Zionism, the terrible secrets of the Cold War. It is a good one, but before we get started, I want everyone to hit that thumbs up, notification bell, leave a comment, tell a friend about me, and hit the subscribe button. Now, before we get started again, I want to make sure that everyone realizes or understands before we get started that Eustace Mullins is not anti-Semitic and he is not a Holocaust denier. Being anti-Zionism is not the same thing as being anti-Semitic. If you do not want Jews to have a land, it doesn't make you anti-Semitic. There are Orthodox Jews that do not believe Israel should exist. They believe that they need to wait until the second coming of the Messiah, or the first coming. I don't know. I'm not really good with Jewish history. So they're waiting for the Messiah to come. I don't know, but they're waiting for that. So there are Jews that are anti-Zionist. So just because you're not pro-Zionism, it does not mean you're anti-Semitic. And after reading this book, I was pro-Zionism. And after reading this book, if what he said is true, I'm kind of anti it now. And you'll find out why. But the issue is what's the truth to this book? How truthful is it? And, I mean, we'll go through it and you can make your own conclusions and it'll be fun. So, let's get started. Zionism is a movement for the reestablishment and the development and protection of a Jewish nation in what is now Israel. A Cold War is a state of political hostility between countries characterized by threats, propaganda, and other measures short of open warfare. The Cold War, which was declared in 1946, ushered in a period of war and revolution. The 44 years of the Cold War ended in 1990 when there was an agreement for peace and arms reduction. During the Cold War time period, there were conflicts like the Korean and Vietnam Wars and many other occurrences between nations like the Arab and Israeli wars. Thanks to lies and mind control, we look back at the Cold War as a period where we were spared war and other horrible hardships. The Cold War wasn't about the constant battle between capitalism and communism, but in reality, both the US and Russia were the leading protagonists. Both countries were governed by the principle of Karl Marx, the founder of the communist movement. Both countries had put into effect principles from the Communist Manifesto of 1948, such as income tax, a central bank, and by-law public schools.
It seems to me the only thing you've learned is that Caesar is a salad dressing dude.
The truth behind the Cold War is that it is a Zionist movement that was artificially created to provide Israel with military supplies. Israel needed the military supplies to survive and expand in the Middle East. James Forrestal, the first Secretary of Defense, refused to strip the United States of its military supplies to send to Israel. Forrestal later conveniently killed himself, and a man named Robert Lovett took over and agreed to all requests of the Israeli government. Winston Churchill was an unemployed politician in England who was chosen to launch the Zionist campaign for his obvious but concealed Zionist sympathies. Churchill announced the onset of the Cold War while giving a speech at Fulton College in Missouri on March 5, 1946. Churchill was not open about his Zionist commitment, but in an autobiography written by the Israeli ambassador of Washington, it is clearly stated Churchill had appointed a cabinet committee for the establishment of the Jewish state by 1944. In 1938, Churchill was given £150,000 from a Zionist sympathizing banker named Henry Starkosh. Starkosh later became Churchill's personal advisor and created Germany Die Lunde S, or Germany Must Be Destroyed. With the Rothschilds backing Churchill, he single-handedly started World War II. Churchill refused any sort of peace between the two nations. Hitler's personal advisor was sent to England to try to convince Churchill to join him in the fight against communism. Hess was thrown in jail, and Churchill became allies with Stalin. The American people had refused to face the reality of what was really happening. The idea that the man who was thought to save England from Hitler would help create the Cold War to siphon arms from the United States to Israel to fight wars against Arab was unthinkable. In 1946, Churchill divided the world into two countries, the United States and Russia, which guaranteed Israel an unending supply of military arms. As the Cold War went on, it turned into a worldwide issue as political and military alliances aligned themselves with Russia or the United States. The North American Treaty Organization, or NATO, was created in Brussels by Lord Carrington, a Rothschild relative who was the president of the Bilderberg Group in Canada.
Oh, sorry there. Didn't see ya. You okay?
I'm fine.
Okay, sorry about that. Have a donut on the hose.
Thanks.
He also set up the South American Treaty Organization, or SATO, while Russia organized the Warsaw Pact between communist nations. Poor nations with no military power were cast off as third world countries that were controlled by the US or Russia. It's odd that the Soviet Union was backing up Arab nations because the Arabs were highly anti-communism and would execute anyone from the Communist Party. When the Palestinians were taken over by the Jews, their Muslim brothers had to come running to defend them. The Soviet Union backed up the Arab nations while the United States backed up Israel. The Soviets would give the Arabs defective equipment, ensuring the Arabs would always be defeated and Israel would emerge stronger. It seemed no Arab nation figured out what the Soviet Union was doing. Most people think Russia was the enemy, when in fact the majority of the Jews in the US are pro-communism. Stalin recognized before being killed by Jewish doctors that the religious beliefs prevent Jews from being pro-Russia, though several people including Arabs knew of this treachery. They did not dare discuss it in fear of being prosecuted by the FBI and the ADL. On December 21st, 1987, the Palestinians attempted an uprising against Israel, but were brutally slaughtered with tanks, armored vehicles, and automatic machine guns. Unarmed women and children were not spared. Israel then justified these gruesome actions by bringing up all the horrific deeds they suffered during the Holocaust. Shockingly enough, Zionists even colluded with the Nazi Party. Mussolini created militias by converting the Zionist youth movement into a group called Betar, which wore black shirts instead of the Nazi brown and greeted each other with a fascist salute. During the late 19th century, the Rothschilds financed a group of Jews that seized farms and businesses from the Arab population. By 1948, there were 600,000 Jews and about 1.8 million Palestinians. When Israel seized Palestine, Jews were only one-third of the population. How did Israel succeed with such a minority? The answer is terrorism.
Are you nuts? Look at all these telegrams. Nice going, Libya. You the man, North Korea. Great job, Iraq. Iraq, Lois!
The nation of Israel is the only nation founded on exclusively terrorism. For example, in 1944, a group of Zionists blew up the King David Hotel, kidnapped British soldiers, and booby-trapped their bodies. They also murdered anyone who sought to give a soldier a Christian burial. This caused anti-Jew riots in London, but they were quickly squashed by the British government. To prevent Americans from learning all about the Zionist atrocities, a nationwide group was formed called neoconservatives. These neoconservatives were disgruntled Zionist communists that cut their ties with Stalin after the murder of their leader, Leon Trotsky. A neoconservative man named Manon Peretz married into a sewing machine dynasty and used the money to provide neoconservative propaganda through major news networks and publications like the New York Times and Washington Post. The main weapon the Zionist movement used was the CIA. The CIA had sources in the Palestinian Liberation Organization, known as PLO, that provided details about any planned attack on Israel.
Really? That's too bad, because we are very interested in your offer.
As a result, the PLO were completely wiped out. The CIA even gave Israel access to military satellites. This collaboration between Israel and the CIA was praised by neoconservatives, which filled the heads of American people with lies and propaganda through news networks and publications. Neoconservatism was very successful in pushing pro-Israel propaganda. In fact, neoconservatives today still own many news networks and publishers that push their propaganda. Alright everyone, thanks for listening. Hit that thumbs up, notification bell, subscribe button, leave a comment, and tell a friend about me. Part 2 will be coming out shortly. Thanks guys.